we are doing the demo on part 2 of the arcade cabinet. So where we last left off on our wonderful adventure, you should hopefully have every single face on your arcade cabinet should have a newly produced UV map by you. So in your UV editor, you'll probably just have a whole bunch of shells just spread out all over the place. Hopefully you were cleanly and you know what is what and sort of how you stacked your shells as you were going. That's good best practices. But now the next step is we are going to condense all of our shells to fit into the space that is known as the UV 0 to 1 space. It is called that because it is from 0 to 1 on the UV editor grid, so to speak, of this space here. Now, as we've talked about, the UV space can be effectively infinite, but when we are trying to take a snapshot of very specific arrangement of our UV shells so that we can put them in Photoshop, we can't use all of the infinite space. Now, when we're just slapping a tileable texture on, or like you can see with this UV grid, doesn't really matter where the shells go because that checkerboard pattern is infinitely tiled. But for what we're going to be doing with putting decals and logos and imagery onto our arcade cabinet, we need a specific texture, which means that we need to get our UVs to fit into a distinct, discrete space so that we can put them into Photoshop for us to work on top of. That brings us sort of to what we are doing today. You can see, looking at my my completed UV shells, but not laid out, you can see that I have squares on all of my shells, which means that the shells are the appropriate proportion. But you can see that the size of the squares is a little erratic. Some things share the same size squares and some do not. So some of these things I won't need to tweak as much, and that's a byproduct of me having accidentally saved over my completed UV maps after having packed them. So I sort of quickly unpacked them for the video. So the main thing to point out is that we are going to be making some decisions about what size particular shells should be so that they get to use the majority of the texture space. So the squares being square is important, and squares matching the size of other squares will also matter, but in a new twist for this assignment, the key will be keeping things that will share similar textures within our similar imagery within our texture. Those should have the same size squares, but the squares don't need to match, say, all across. Like the squares on this side of the arcade cabinet, which should be getting more texture detail, doesn't need to have squares the same size as, say, the back of our arcade cabinet, where there will be much less detail for the texture. I'm just going to slap most likely a solid color on the back of this, like, say, a black, so it doesn't need to get a lot of texture detail, and I don't need it to match in the texture detail size of, say, this side here. So certain things we will want to keep the squares sort of matching up with one another, and in other cases, you know, the squares won't need to match up with more than maybe one shell or even no shells. So going down, or going through this, I guess, I'm going to start with just these simple 5 faces that make up the base of the UV, or excuse me, the arcade cabinet and their UVs. So if you look at them, you can see basically the squares are already about the same size on all of these, and that's just a factor of using the same unfold parameters. I can see here that my squares here for this shell don't quite match to the ones on the other ones, so I'll make this shell a little bigger to sort of match those up. Now, these are all matched up. I know that I want to keep these together eventually when I start packing in my 0 to 1. I want these all to share the same simple texture, so I will be making them smaller when I pack them in here, but I'm going to wait to do that until I've sort of made my decisions about the size of particular shells. So I'm going to go and now take a look at, let's do these side shells, because I want to start packing early so I can figure out what size things will need to be. So these two, They are already the same size because I projected them together and unfolded them together. I just unstacked them. So first I would just make sure that these shells, they match up in size. They're not like next to each other, so you can mostly guesstimate if they're not exactly equivalent. Yo. What's up, dude? Yeah, so you just want to make sure these shells are the same size. Looking at, oh, okay. No, you're chilling. So with this, we're going to get these shells down in here, the 0 to 1 space. Like I said, these are the important shells, so they should be getting a lot of texture space. So I'm not going to scale them down too much. I'm just going to put them here in this bottom corner, and then that way I can stack things around it. So using the logic I just described to you folks, these shells on the back, they're just going to get solid black. Not very important. So I would make them smaller if they weren't already small. This is a pretty decent size. I'm just going to put this right here, up here, so I know this is the back. The top is not going to get a lot of texture detail either, so I'll just slap that there. These squares don't match up, so I'll make this a little smaller so that those squares match up in size, so they'll get the same texture quality. And then this should be the underside, yeah. And I'm just guesstimating on these. It's not. Yeah, it looks good enough. I think these squares are like the same size. Oh, that's right. They would be the same width. That's right. That's your cheat code. Because the whole object is the same uniform width. The shells should be the same width. So if you're trying to get the squares to match. All right. So again, I made these small in my UV space so that they don't line up, or so that they don't take up a lot of space because they're not important. These ones also similarly not super important, so I'm gonna bring these in up here. These I'm just gonna put like a matte black on. Just go around the screen and around the sign. That sort of brings me to my next thing, which is the sign. Right? Sign we want to be good. And the screen we want to be good. We want to have that look good. So let me get these to match up with one another, and then I'll scale these up because I want whatever I put on these this screen and on this marquee to look nice and high texture quality. Alright, that's where I'll pause it. Folks, small break, a little bit of edit. So where we were last at, I just was throwing these in here, right? And so the key is the things that we want to have good texture quality get more size in the texture. And the things that are less important for their texture quality, or we're doing simple stuff to it, don't need to be as big. So that brings me back to these bad boys from the bottom that I did moments ago. Like I said, we want the squares to match up, but they're not important what they're getting textured with. Probably just put a solid color on all of these. So I'm just going to take these boxes, just make them sort of neat so they're easier for me to pack. And I'm going to come down here and just sort of pack these in here. I think I could probably do like this and probably fit this in here somewhere. Maybe, mayhaps. That's okay. Which one's the top? This is the top one, right? I'll do this one separately. Yeah, this is the top one. Okay, I'll put the top one over here. This one goes over there. Not that it really matters, but just for sake of being cleanly. Okay, cool. So again, I'm just gonna put a solid color on those. Pretty straightforward. Now, on the front here, I might put some nice decal, right? So I'll bring this over here. It's not receiving the same decal that is on the screen or this stuff. So, and I just sort of like griefed it with this. You don't necessarily need to have this be the same size as the screen. I'm just making it bigger than the other stuff so that it's easier and has a nicer texture to put on it, but doesn't need to be this big. Yeah, okay. You know what, honestly, it's probably fine that way. This one, like I said, I want to put a nice decal on it, so I'm going to leave it big. So you can see I'm running out of texture space to really put my stuff in, so you got to be mindful of that as you go, depending on how big things are going to be. So like this is, okay, so this is the top of the, where the, what do you call it, the controls would go. So I want to put a nice decal on that as well. So I'm going to make that bigger than everything else that's on there. But, and we don't want overlapping, folks, as a reminder note. So all of this stuff, though, the rest of it, this is all, again, going to just be a solid color. So simple solid color. I'm probably not going to put anything else on it. So I'm going to make this relatively small, to be honest with you. Boom. We'll slam that in right there. So here's the front of it, and then here's all those faces that make up the other parts of this. And then up here is, oh, you know what? I'm going to switch these. I'll put this here. I'll move this up here. Just for sake of cleanliness, again, alike with alike, so I can put all of these parts that are for that part there, so I sort of know what's up, what's up. Okay, cool. And then, so this face right here, oh, this is the face I forgot about. This is the face that's like inside here. If you don't project this, it'll just be, it's just gonna get textured aligned. So I am gonna make this baby small because it's literally not gonna show up. I'm just gonna make it small, and I'm just gonna slot it in like right underneath all this stuff because I'm just gonna put black on these parts anyway. So just put black on that. Okay, so the last stuff we have left really is the coin op area. So we just gotta find a good spot for that. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take these two areas, which just I'm gonna flip on isolate select. These are the two coin op slots, or like the button that says like insert coin or whatever, right? And then there's the slots, so not in the slots, but around the slots. So here I'm going to put like an insert coin kind of thing. So I do want them to have slightly more texture space than the other pieces of this. So I'm going to take, I'll put these here for a second. I'm using my UV shell mode, just grabbing these shells. I'll put these in here so they get a little bit more space. Yeah, okay, we'll leave them there. I'll just move them down sort of like this. And then that brings me to this flat coin op area. This is all going to be like black metal, right? This is very simple, straightforward. So I'm going to collapse all of this stuff into basically this area in this little gap of my, what do you call it? The little cruck in between these two pieces. Now on this one, I did not go around and check the proportions of my shells. Again, you want alike with alike. So like, let me undo actually moving this here, just so that I make sure that I talk about this. Let me turn this on and off. So we want to make sure that the shells of these things on the coin op that are getting the same black metal on it are similarly sized. So let me scale this up so that the squares are relatively small on this. I'm looking at these squares right here, right? That looks cool. That looks cool. All these other shells. I already, like I said, I did this the last time that I did this, so you'll just want to make sure you grab these and figure out, make sure that the squares are relatively the same size. Oh, these ones, yep, didn't get these right. Where are these shells? Oh, that's right, I have a whole bunch of shells down here too. So these are all my coin op area shells. So like these ones that I just made a few minutes ago, they're gigantoid. So I'm just scaling these down so that the squares are like the right size that they should be. I'll put these down over here. What about these? These are the sides. Oh, those are the front parts of the, okay, of the coin op thing. Okay, cool. Put that over here. Boom. So I can grab all this. These are all these faces, and I'll scale these down significantly so that the squares align. Grab these. So again, make these much smaller. Don't have to be Mondo perfect. Oh, these are these little tiny faces up here. They're like basically infinitesimal, so you're just like really not gonna see them, but you should try. And then these are the inside of this. Boom, we'll scale this These are the outside and the inside ones. Oh, except the inside ones also. Let's scale these up. Then we'll do these ones. Okay. Whoops. Cool. And we'll bring these down here. Okay. So now, all of the squares basically match up at this point. We know that the sizes more or less match up. These ones should be separate, right? Because they're getting more detail than these other ones. So now I can go ahead and grab all of these, and I'm going to scale them down quite significantly. And I just need to arrange them in this space somehow. So let's see. I'll put this over here, just for sake of space-wise, and then that way I know you can just grab all these. This is just the like coin-op pieces that are sticking out here, and the sides of this, I want to say. Yeah, so I got all the squares to match up. I'm just, like I said, I'm just going to put this stuff all in here, in this little gap space. Then I know I can just make a little shape that's black and just slap some black on top of it, and then we're all good. So now all of my shells, if I zoom out, now live in this 0 to 1 space. So now if I was ready to take this into Photoshop, so I'm going to go ahead and save. Here's what you would need to do, folks. So as you were given with the CAN project, I gave you the project folder already made with the CAN snapshot already made for you in the images folder. So this is something that we've only, sort of touched on. I've talked about projects in passing. I think we made one project for the cinder block, but before you send this off to live in, or to Photoshop, you're going to want it to now live in its own project. So I'm going to go to Project Window. And chances are it's looking at your last project, which was the CAN project. So in this case, I'm going to make a new project, and this should be your last name with arcade cabinet, whatever, boom. But you're just going to give it your last name, _arcade, -arcade, whatever, so I know who it is. Except, and so that went into my folder called the drop, which is this one. So if I look under MEYER, you'll now see I have a Meyer Arcade folder. And then, no need to reinvent the wheel, folks. You're just going to do File, Save Scene As. If everything's all good, you just made your project. It should say, hey, I think you would want to save this new copy of your file into this new project's scenes folder, which is where files live in a project. That would be correct. So under my newly made Meyer Arcade project, when I hit Save As, it wants to look in the scenes folder. So I'll just go ahead and do Save As there. Boom. So now I know I have a copy in my project folder. And then in my UV editor, you'll go to Image, UV Snapshot. And so this is what you do when you have completely laid out all of your UVs in the 0 to 1, and you have made your project and saved your file into the project, because you want to be cleanly. So UV Snapshot, it'll ask you a couple of questions. The file name, out UV in your images folder of your newly made project is where it should go. File format, pros use Targa. You can just use a PNG or a JPEG. PNG. 2048 by 2048 is good. Tiles, 1 to 1. So that's where I say the default area for Maya is the 0 to 1. So from 0 to 1, 0 to 1. And you can see that right here. So anyway, boom, apply and close. Oh, except you have to select it in object mode because I'm a clown and I forgot. There you go. Boom. Saved file. Documents, the drop, Meyer Arcade, images, out UV. So if I open up this images folder now, there's my UV snapshot. And that's what you got with the CAN project, if I put a black background behind this so you can see it a little easier. Boom. And that is our completed UV layout on its way into Photoshop.